A family poses in 1902 when enlarging the mother's face. Experts are left speechless. Josep Martinez adjusted his magnifying glasses while carefully examining the sepia photograph on his work table. His antique photograph restoration workshop in Barcelona's Gothic quarter had seen thousands of historical images pass through, but something in this 1902 family portrait had immediately captured his professional attention. The image had arrived that morning with Maria Vidal, a middle-aged woman who had inherited a collection of family photographs from her great-grandmother. "My family has always preserved these photos," Maria had explained to him. "This one in particular is special because it shows my great-great-grandparents with their 3 children. According to family records, it was taken in 1902 at their home in Barcelona." Joseph studied the formal composition typical of the era. A distinguished man of about 40 years, dressed in a dark suit with vest, stood behind an elegant woman seated in an upholstered chair. 3 small children, 2 girls and a boy, were arranged around their parents with the characteristic rigidity of Victorian photographs, when long exposure times required absolute stillness. The woman Maria had identified as Esperanza Vidal wore a dark satin dress with elaborate lace and jewelry, indicating a comfortable social position. Her hair was styled in the Gibson girl fashion popular at the time, and her hands delicately placed on her lap showed expensive rings that reflected the light from the photographic studio. What most intrigued Joseph was the exceptional quality of the photograph for 1902. The photographer had achieved extraordinary sharpness, especially in the faces, which was unusual for the technology available at that time. The details were so precise that he could individually distinguish the pearls in the mother's necklace and the textures of the lace on her dress. Joseph decided that this photograph deserved his most advanced restoration treatment. He would use high-resolution digitization, followed by digital enhancement techniques to eliminate age spots and restore the image to its original glory. Unknowingly, he was about to discover that this apparently normal family harbored secrets that would completely change the story the Vidal descendants had believed for more than a century. Joseph began the digitization process using his professional 9600 DPI scanner, designed specifically for delicate historical photographs. The resulting image had an extraordinary resolution that would allow enlarging any section without loss of detail, revealing aspects that had remained hidden for 122 years. On his high-definition monitor, Joseph opened the digital restoration software he had been perfecting during his 15-year career. He began his systematic work, first eliminating the most obvious stains, small brown marks caused by humidity, fine lines where the emulsion had cracked, and typical discoloration spots from photographic aging. It was while working on improving the contrast and sharpness of the mother's face that Joseph noticed the first anomalies. When enlarging the image to 400%, he began to distinguish details that were not visible to the human eye in the original photograph. In the hair area near the left ear, there was a subtle inconsistency in texture that suggested something was being hidden. Joseph applied specialized filters to reveal hidden layers of the image. What he discovered left him momentarily speechless. Under what he had assumed was natural hair, the edge of what appeared to be a sophisticated wig was clearly distinguishable. The hair did not grow naturally from the scalp, but was carefully placed over an artificial base. Intrigued, Joseph continued his detailed analysis. When examining the facial skin at maximum magnification, he noticed makeup applications that were extraordinarily sophisticated for 1902. The cosmetic technology of the era was primitive compared to what he was seeing. Multiple layers of powders and creams applied with professional precision to create a completely different appearance. But most disturbing was what he discovered when applying digital spectral analysis techniques. Behind the right ear, partially hidden by the wig and makeup, a small fleur-de-lis tattoo was clearly distinguishable, and near the left eye, under a thick layer of cosmetic, there was a distinctive crescent-shaped scar. Joseph had restored thousands of historical photographs, but had never seen such clear evidence that someone had deliberately altered their physical appearance. The woman in the photograph was not only posing for a formal portrait, she was playing a completely fabricated character. The question that began to obsess Josep was simple, but chilling. If this woman was not really Esperanza Vidal, who was she, and why had she needed to so elaborately hide her true identity? Josep contacted Maria Vidal to inform her about his preliminary discoveries, although he decided to be careful in how he presented the information. I have found some interesting details in the photograph that could help us better understand your family's history, he explained during a phone call. Would it be possible to review any family documentation you have about Esperanza Vidal? Maria was intrigued and agreed to meet with Josep at her apartment in Gracia, where she kept family archives inherited from previous generations. The apartment was full of antique furniture and family photographs that documented more than a century of Vidal family history. My great-grandmother always told us that Esperanza was an extraordinary woman, Maria explained, while extracting a wooden box full of documents. According to family history, she was very cultured and spoke several languages, which was unusual for women of that era. My great-grandfather Ricardo adored her, but she died young of tuberculosis in 1905. Josep examined the documents Maria had preserved. The marriage certificate, dated 1898, showed that Ricardo Vidal, a 38-year-old textile industrialist, had married Esperanza Montoya, 24 years old, described as having no known profession and originally from Valencia. However, Josep noticed that Esperanza's signature on the document was extraordinarily elegant and sophisticated, indicating an education that contradicted her official description. More intriguing was a collection of letters that Esperanza had written to Ricardo during their courtship. The letters were written in perfect Spanish, but Josep, who had experience in historical calligraphy, noticed subtleties in the writing that suggested Spanish was not the author's native language. There were grammatical structures and idiomatic expressions that were more characteristic of French translated into Spanish. Maria also showed him Esperanza's death certificate, dated March 3, 1905. The cause of death was listed as pulmonary tuberculosis, but Josep noticed something strange. There were no medical records to support this terminal illness, nor mentions in family letters that Esperanza had been sick. "Did your family preserve any personal possessions of Esperanza?" asked Josep. Maria led him to a closet where she kept inherited jewelry and personal objects. Among the articles was a gold brooch with inscriptions in French, several French poetry books with handwritten annotations, and most revealing, a small personal diary with entries written in French. Josep asked permission to photograph some pages of the diary. Although his French was limited, he could distinguish that the entries did not seem like typical reflections of a bourgeois housewife, but detailed observations about industrial activities, military personnel movements, and confidential information received. The evidence was beginning to suggest that Esperanza Vidal had been something very different from what the family had believed for more than a century. Joseph decided to seek professional help to correctly interpret his findings. He contacted Dr. Elena Ruiz, a historian specializing in early 20th century Spain at the University of Barcelona, known for her research on international espionage during the period before World War I. In her office full of books and historical documents, Dr. Ruiz carefully examined the enlarged digital images that Josep had prepared. Her immediate reaction was one of professional amazement. This level of appearance alteration was extremely sophisticated for 1902. It required specialized knowledge and materials that were not available to ordinary civilians. Josep showed her the photographs of the fleur-de-lis tattoo and the crescent-shaped scar. The historian remained silent for several minutes, consulting reference books in her personal library. Finally, she addressed Josep with a serious expression. "I think we need to consult historical intelligence archives. These marks could be identifying features of secret operatives." Dr. Ruiz contacted colleagues in Paris who had access to historical archives of French intelligence services. While they awaited a response, she investigated the historical context of the 1900-1905 period in Spain. This was a period of intense diplomatic tensions, she explained. France and Spain had conflicting interests in Morocco, and both countries maintained active espionage networks to monitor mutual military capabilities. Josep also shared with the historian the pages of the French diary he had photographed. Dr. Ruiz, fluent in French, translated them with growing alarm. "These are not personal diary entries, they are intelligence reports. They describe details about Spanish military production, troop movements, and industrial capabilities that would be extremely valuable to foreign intelligence." An entry dated April 1903 was particularly revealing. "R continues to trust me completely. His connections with military contracts provide excellent access to information about new weapons technologies. Details about the munitions factory have been transmitted according to established protocol." Dr. Ruiz explained that during this period, Spanish industrialists like Ricardo Vidal frequently had government contracts to produce military equipment. If someone had gained intimate access to this information through marriage, they could have compromised significant national military secrets. "Josep," said the historian gravely, "I think you have discovered evidence of one of the most sophisticated espionage operations of the early 20th century. This woman was not Esperanza Vidal. She was a professional spy who had created a completely false identity to infiltrate Spanish society." The findings were transforming what had begun as a routine photographic restoration project into a historical investigation of international importance. 3 weeks later, Dr. Ruiz received a response from her contacts at the French National Archives. Dr. Pierre Dubus, a specialist in French espionage history, had found extraordinary information in previously classified archives that had been recently declassified as part of historical transparency projects. "Dear colleagues," wrote Dr. Dubus in a detailed email, "the markers you have discovered, the fleur-de-lis tattoo and the crescent scar, correspond exactly to the records of a legendary operative of our secret services, Celeste Moreau, known by the codename Marguerite. The French archives revealed that Celeste Moreau had been one of the most successful spies of the 12e Bureau, the French military intelligence service. Born in Marseille in 1874, she had been recruited at 22 after demonstrating exceptional abilities for languages, acting, and social manipulation. Her training had included advanced techniques of appearance alteration, seduction, and information extraction. Moreau's file described her identifying marks: distinctive fleur-de-lis tattoo behind the right ear, applied during initial training; crescent-shaped scar near the left eye, result of combat training; perfect mastery of Spanish, Italian, and German; specialization in high society infiltration and strategic marriages. Josep felt dizzy reading the details of Moreau's Spanish mission. Operation Iberia, 1898-1905. Objective: infiltrate Spanish industrial circles with access to military contracts. Method: strategic marriage with influential industrialist. Cover: Esperanza Montoya, Valencian orphan, no verifiable family. The documents described how the French services had meticulously created the false identity of Esperanza Montoya. They had forged birth records, created a verifiable personal history, and trained Moreau in specific Valencian dialects and regional cultural knowledge that would make her credible as a native of the region. The operation had been extraordinarily successful. For 7 years, Moreau had transmitted detailed information about Spanish military capabilities, including specifications of new weapons, locations of military installations, and defense plans. Her intimate access to Ricardo Vidal had provided her with information about secret government contracts and military technological developments. Dr. Dubus explained that Esperanza's death in 1905 had been a planned extraction. The Spanish services began to suspect French infiltration. Moreau was extracted through fake death by tuberculosis, a disease that required isolation and justified the absence of witnesses during the terminal illness. The archives confirmed that Celeste Moreau had continued operating for France until 1918, when she retired with a full pension and secret honors for exceptional services to French national security. Josep realized he had discovered not just a fascinating historical photograph, but evidence of one of the most sophisticated espionage operations in European history. Josep knew he had to inform Maria Vidal about his discoveries, but the prospect of revealing that her great-great-grandmother had been a French spy who had deceived her family for years was overwhelming. He decided to invite Maria to a meeting with Dr. Ruiz present, so she could help explain the historical context and implications of the findings. The meeting took place at the university, in a formal environment that Maria initially interpreted as a good sign. "I thought they had found something wonderful about my family," she would confess later to Josep. Her reaction when she saw the enlarged images and heard the explanation was one of total shock, followed by denial. "This is impossible," murmured Maria, examining the digital photographs that clearly showed the tattoo and scar. "My family always told us that Esperanza was a devout and caring woman who adored my great-great-grandfather and her children. She cannot be a French spy." Dr. Ruiz gently explained that the best spies were precisely those who could convincingly play the role of dedicated wives and mothers. Mrs. Vidal, the French documents confirmed that Celeste Moreau was extraordinarily skilled at creating authentic emotional connections, even while fulfilling her mission. It is very likely that she developed genuine affection for her family, even while professionally betraying them. Maria asked to see the translations of the diary entries, to read the clinical descriptions of how Esperanza had manipulated information from Ricardo and had reported intimate details about the family to her French superiors. It was devastating. She knew everything about us, our family secrets, our plans, our vulnerabilities, and she was reporting it to foreign enemies. However, there were also humanizing aspects in the documents. An entry from 1904 showed internal conflict. "The children have become very dear to me. Ricardo is a good man who doesn't deserve this betrayal. However, my duty to France must prevail over personal feelings. I hope that when this mission ends, they can someday forgive what they will never understand." Joseph showed Maria evidence that Morrow had made discreet arrangements to ensure the family's financial well-being after her death. She had secretly transferred substantial funds to accounts that Ricardo would eventually discover, apparently coming from unknown investments that Esperanza had made. "She really loved them in her way," observed Dr. Ruiz. "The best spies are those who can maintain humanity, even while fulfilling missions that require betrayal." Morrow seems to have genuinely struggled with the conflict between her professional duty and her family feelings. Maria needed several weeks to fully process the implications of these discoveries. Her family image of more than a century had been completely transformed by modern technology, applied to a photograph that her family had innocently preserved for generations. Motivated by the emotional impact that the discoveries had had on Maria Vidal, Joseph decided to investigate more deeply the historical consequences of Celeste Morrow's espionage operation. Working with Dr. Ruiz, they began to analyze what specific information had been compromised and how it had affected Franco-Spanish relations. The French archives provided specific details about the information that Morrow had transmitted between 1898 and 1905. The intelligence included detailed specifications of new Mauser rifles that Spain was producing under German license, exact locations of ammunition depots in Barcelona and Valencia, and most significantly, defensive plans for Spanish possessions in Morocco. Dr. Ruiz explained the geopolitical context. During this period, France and Spain were competing intensely for influence in Morocco. The information that Morrow provided would have given France enormous strategic advantages in diplomatic negotiations and military planning. Joseph realized that Ricardo Vidal had been involved in more sensitive government contracts than the family had known. His textile company not only produced military uniforms, but had also diversified into production of munitions components and military communication equipment. This information would have been extremely valuable to French intelligence. A particularly revealing document showed that Morrow's information had directly contributed to the Treaty of Algeciras in 1906, where France had obtained significant concessions in Morocco. French negotiators had known exactly the Spanish military capabilities and the limitations of their Moroccan defenses, information that could only have come from sources like Morrow's operation. Joseph also investigated whether Spanish intelligence services had eventually discovered the operation. In archives of the Spanish Ministry of War, he found evidence that in 1905, an investigation had begun into possible French infiltration in industrial circles. The investigation had identified several suspicious persons, including the wife of a Barcelona textile industrialist who had shown unusual interest in military matters. The Spanish document suggested that authorities had begun to suspect Esperanza Vidal specifically. A report from March 1905, the same month as her death, mentioned plans to interrogate the suspect Vidal about her activities. The sudden death from tuberculosis had effectively ended the investigation. Morrow's extraction was perfectly timed, observed Dr. Ruiz. The French got her out exactly when her cover was about to be compromised. It was an impeccable professional operation. Joseph realized that the family portrait he had been restoring was not just evidence of personal deception, but a historical document that illustrated the complexities of international espionage in a crucial period of European history. The 1902 photograph had captured a moment when Spain was being systematically compromised by one of the most successful spies of the era. One of the most disturbing questions that arose during the investigation was, what had happened to Ricardo Vidal's 3 children after the death of their spy mother? Joseph and Dr. Ruiz decided to investigate family records to understand how Morrow's betrayal had affected the most innocent victims of her operation. Maria Vidal provided information about the children: Carmen, born in 1899, Diego 1901, and Isabel 1903. All three had been raised by Ricardo with help from his sister after Esperanza's death. Family records showed that Ricardo had never remarried, remaining faithful to the memory of his deceased wife. Josep found in educational archives that the three children had been sent to expensive private schools. This was unusual, given that the family supposedly had faced financial difficulties after Esperanza's death. However, the school payments had been covered by an anonymous charitable foundation that provided education to orphans from distinguished industrial families. The investigation revealed that this charitable foundation had been secretly established by the French services as part of Moreau's extraction plan. The French had wanted to ensure that the children received quality education, both for humanitarian reasons and to maintain the operation's cover. If the children had suffered financially after their mother's death, it could have generated suspicions about the circumstances of her demise. The school records showed that all three children had been exceptional students, particularly in languages. Carmen had developed fluency in French, Diego had shown aptitude for mathematics and sciences, and Isabel had excelled in literature and arts. Their teachers had noted that the children showed unusual cultural sophistication, as if they had been exposed to advanced educational influences from an early age. Maria provided letters that the children had written to relatives when they were adults. In a letter from Carmen dated 1925, there was an intriguing reference. "Sometimes I feel that Mama taught us things I don't fully understand, as if she had had special knowledge about the world that goes beyond what an ordinary Spanish woman would have known." Diego, who had become an engineer, had shown throughout his life an unusual interest in French military technology. Isabel had emigrated to Paris in 1920 and had worked for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a career that had been facilitated by recommendations she could never fully explain. Dr. Ruiz suggested a disturbing theory. It's possible that Moreau had been subconsciously preparing these children for careers that could benefit France. As a professional spy, she would have understood the value of long-term influences. Joseph realized that Moreau's operation had had ramifications that extended decades beyond her official mission, affecting not only her victim husband, but entire generations of the Vidal family who never knew the true identity of the woman they had called mother and grandmother. Joseph realized that his discoveries had implications that extended far beyond a single family. He decided to fully document the case and present it to historical institutions, both Spanish and French. But first, he wanted to give Maria Vidal the opportunity to decide how she wanted the information to be handled publicly. In an emotional meeting at Maria's apartment, Joseph presented all the evidence he had compiled: the digitally restored photographs, translations of French documents, intelligence archives, and the complete chronology of Moreau's operation. Maria had invited other members of the Vidal family to hear the findings. The family reaction was mixed. Some descendants felt betrayed and wanted to keep the information secret to protect the family reputation. Others argued that the story was too important to be suppressed. Maria's cousin, Carlos Vidal, expressed a perspective that surprised everyone. "Maybe we should feel proud. Our great-great-grandmother, even though she was a spy, was clearly an extraordinary woman who lived a life of adventure and courage that few women of her era could have imagined." Maria finally decided that the story should be told, but in a way that honored both Moreau's complexity and Ricardo's suffering. "My great-great-grandfather was a good man who was manipulated for political reasons that were beyond his understanding. But she was also a human being who apparently struggled with conflicts between her duty and her feelings." Joseph worked with Dr. Ruiz to prepare a detailed academic article about the case. The article would be published simultaneously in Spanish and French historical journals, presenting the discovery as an example of how modern technology can reveal historical secrets that had remained hidden for more than a century. The publication generated immediate international interest. Espionage historians from across Europe contacted Joseph to request access to the digital images and documentation. The case was presented as a perfect example of how early 20th century intelligence operations had been much more sophisticated than had been previously understood. The French Minister of Culture issued a statement officially recognizing Moreau's operation for the first time. France recognizes that during the period 1898-1905, French intelligence operatives conducted activities in Spain that, although justified by the national security needs of the era, involved deception of innocent Spanish citizens. We express respect for the affected families and recognition of the moral complexity of these historical operations. Josep realized that his restoration project had evolved into something much more significant. He had contributed to a more complete understanding of European history and had demonstrated how modern technology could reveal truths that had remained buried for generations. 1 year after the initial discovery, Josep was invited to present the Morrow case at the International Congress of Espionage History in Paris. His presentation, titled "When Technology Reveals History, the Case of the Forgotten Spy," became one of the most discussed lectures of the event. During his stay in Paris, Josep was contacted by Marie-Claire Morrow, a 78-year-old woman who identified herself as Celeste Morrow's great-niece. "My family always knew that Aunt Celeste had done something important for France, but we never knew exactly what," she explained. Seeing finally her photograph and understanding her complete story is extraordinarily emotional. Marie-Claire had brought family documents that provided the French perspective of the story. Among them were letters that Morrow had written to her sister after her retirement in 1905, where she expressed deep conflicts about her work in Spain. "I will never be able to forget the family I had to abandon. Although I fulfilled my duty to France, I feel that I also betrayed good people who didn't deserve to be used as tools of international politics. I hope that when this mission ends, they can someday forgive what they will never understand." The meeting between Marie-Claire and Maria Vidal, facilitated by Josep, was an extraordinary historical moment. Two families that had been connected by deception and betrayal more than a century before met to honestly discuss the complex legacy of their ancestors. "Your great-great-grandmother genuinely loved your family," Marie-Claire told Maria. "The letters she wrote to my great-grandmother are full of pain about the double life she had to live. She knew she was hurting people she had come to love." Maria responded with a generosity that surprised even Josep. "I understand that she was trapped between two worlds, her duty to France and the feelings she developed for our family. I cannot justify what she did, but I can understand the human complexity of her situation." The two women decided to collaborate on a joint project, a memorial that would honor both the memory of Ricardo Vidal as an innocent victim of international espionage and the recognition of Celeste Morrow as a woman who had navigated extraordinary circumstances with courage, though at a significant moral cost. Josep donated the original restored photograph and all his documentation to the Barcelona History Museum, where a permanent exhibition was established titled "Hidden Identities, Espionage and Family in 1902, Spain." The exhibition presents the complete story, including the digital restoration techniques that made the discovery possible. The 1902 family photograph, once an innocent symbol of domestic happiness, had now become a complex historical document that illustrated the human realities of international espionage. Museum visitors can see both the original image and the digital enlargements that reveal the hidden secrets, along with documentation that contextualizes the operation within the geopolitical tensions of the early 20th century. In his inauguration speech for the exhibition, Josep reflected on the lessons of the case. "This photograph reminds us that history is rarely simple. The people we think we know may have lived extraordinary secret lives. Modern technology allows us to discover these hidden stories, but it also forces us to confront the moral complexity of our past." The Vidal family had finally found peace with their revised history. The descendants had come to see Celeste Morrow not as a villain who had destroyed their family, but as a complex historical figure who had operated in a world where national loyalties frequently conflicted with human connections. Josep continued his photographic restoration work, but with a new appreciation for the power of historical images to reveal truths that their original creators never intended to document. Each photograph he restored, he now examined not only for its aesthetic value, but for the secrets it might be hiding under layers of time and deterioration. The case of the 1902 spy had become a reminder that history lives not only in official documents, but in the family photographs we innocently preserve, waiting for future technology to reveal the extraordinary stories that have remained hidden for generations in the faces of our ancestors.